In the rolling hills of eastern Oklahoma, where ancient forests whisper secrets older than memory, 3 young lives were stolen in a manner so calculated and disturbing that it would haunt investigators for decades. What began as a summer camp adventure became a nightmare that exposed something far more sinister lurking in the shadows of Camp Scott. But before we uncover the mystery, hit that subscribe button below. It was June 12, 1977, in the dense woodlands of Locust Grove, Oklahoma, where Camp Scott stretched across 400 acres of pristine wilderness. The Girl Scout camp had operated for 49 years without serious incident, nestled among towering oaks and crossed by crystal-clear streams that had carved their paths through red clay soil for millennia. The camp director, Barbara Day, had overseen countless successful summers, but that particular season carried an undercurrent of unease that even experienced counselors couldn't ignore. Local residents had reported strange disturbances in the weeks leading up to the camp's opening. Farmers found livestock arranged in deliberate patterns across their fields, not scattered randomly as predators would leave them, but positioned with an almost ritualistic precision that defied explanation. 3 girls arrived at Camp Scott that fateful Sunday, each carrying dreams of adventure and friendship. 8-year-old Lori Lee Farmer from Tulsa possessed an infectious enthusiasm that brightened every tent she entered. 9-year-old Michelle Heather Guse from Broken Arrow demonstrated natural leadership qualities that made her popular among younger campers. 10-year-old Doris Denise Milner from Tulsa had attended camp before and served as a reassuring presence for newcomers. The girls were assigned to tent number 8 in the Kiowa unit, the most remote section of the campgrounds. Their counselor, 20-year-old Carla Wilhite, had positioned her own tent strategically between the campers and the forest edge, following standard safety protocols that had proven effective for decades. During the first evening's activities, several campers reported hearing unusual sounds emanating from the surrounding woods. Unlike typical forest noises, these disturbances followed a rhythmic pattern that seemed almost communicative in nature. When counselors investigated, they found nothing but darkness and the oppressive silence that often precedes tragedy. The camp's maintenance records, later examined by investigators, revealed a troubling detail that had been overlooked during the initial setup. Multiple staff members had discovered crude shelters constructed deep within the forest, built with materials that appeared to have been gathered over months rather than days. These structures showed signs of recent habitation, with personal items that suggested someone had been watching the camp's activities with methodical patience. As night fell on June 12th, a violent thunderstorm swept across the region, bringing torrential rain and winds that masked sounds that might otherwise have alerted the counselors. The storm's intensity created perfect conditions for someone to move through the camp undetected, using nature's chaos as cover for purposes that would soon become horrifyingly clear. Sometime during the early morning hours of June 13th, an intruder entered tent number 8. The attack was swift and brutal, carried out with a level of violence that suggested both rage and calculated planning. The 3 girls were bound with rope and tape, then removed from their tent and transported deeper into the forest where their suffering would continue beyond the reach of help. When counselors discovered the empty tent that Monday morning, they initially assumed the girls had simply wandered off during the storm. This assumption lasted only until they noticed the blood-soaked sleeping bags and the clear signs of struggle that painted a far more sinister picture. The tent's canvas walls bore slash marks that formed patterns too deliberate to be random, as if the attacker had been marking territory or leaving a signature. The bodies of all 3 girls were discovered approximately 150 yards from their tent, near a path that led to the camp's remote hiking trails. Each victim had been sexually assaulted and murdered with extreme violence, their young lives ended by someone who demonstrated both physical strength and psychological detachment from human suffering. The crime scene revealed details that would perplex investigators for years. The killer had apparently spent considerable time arranging the scene, positioning personal items from the tent in specific locations that seemed to follow some internal logic known only to the perpetrator. A red flashlight belonging to one of the girls was found hanging from a tree branch at a height that required deliberate placement rather than accidental dropping. Immediately launched the largest manhunt in Oklahoma history, involving multiple agencies and hundreds of volunteers who combed through thousands of acres of wilderness. The investigation quickly focused on John Leroy Hart, a 33-year-old Cherokee man who had escaped from prison and was known to be hiding in the same forest that surrounded Camp Scott. Hart possessed intimate knowledge of the terrain, having grown up in the area and spent years learning every trail and hiding place the forest offered. His criminal history included multiple convictions for burglary and rape, establishing a pattern of behavior that aligned disturbingly well with the Camp Scott murders. Physical evidence found at the scene included fingerprints and hair samples that appeared to link him to the crime. However, the case contained contradictions that troubled even experienced investigators. Witnesses reported seeing a figure moving through the camp weeks before the murders, someone who seemed to be studying the layout and routines with professional thoroughness. This individual was described as significantly larger than Hart, with different physical characteristics that suggested multiple people might have been involved. The most disturbing evidence emerged from the camp's surrounding forest, where investigators discovered a complex network of hidden shelters and supply caches that indicated long-term surveillance of the facility. These sites contained detailed notes about camp schedules, staff rotations, and the specific locations of individual tents. The handwriting analysis proved inconclusive, but the level of planning suggested someone with military or law enforcement training. During the investigation, several witnesses came forward with accounts of unusual activity in the months preceding the murders. A local woman reported encountering a man near the camp who spoke about the facility with intimate knowledge of its operations, despite claiming to be a stranger to the area. When she described this individual to investigators, his physical description matched neither Hart nor any known associates. The killer had also left behind a piece of evidence that defied easy explanation. Carved into the bark of a massive oak tree near the crime scene was a series of symbols that bore no resemblance to any known Native American writing system, despite initial assumptions about their origin. Linguistic experts consulted by investigators could not identify the markings' meaning or cultural source, leading to speculation about their significance in the killer's psychological profile. Hart was eventually captured after a massive manhunt that lasted 10 months and cost the state of Oklahoma over $2 million. His trial became one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in state history, with evidence presented that seemed to conclusively link him to the murders through physical evidence and circumstantial connections. The prosecution's case relied heavily on hair and fiber evidence found at the crime scene, along with Hart's established pattern of sexual violence and his presence in the forest during the time of the murders. Expert witnesses testified about the statistical probability of the evidence pointing to someone other than Hart, creating what appeared to be an overwhelming case for conviction. However, Hart's defense team presented evidence that raised serious questions about the investigation's thoroughness and the reliability of the physical evidence. They argued that the crime scene had been contaminated by the large number of people who had accessed it before proper forensic protocols were established, potentially compromising the integrity of crucial evidence. The jury deliberated for several hours before reaching a verdict that shocked the prosecution and the victims' families. John Leroy Hart was acquitted of all charges, despite evidence that many observers considered conclusive proof of his guilt. The verdict left the case officially unsolved and the families without the closure they desperately sought. Hart's acquittal did not end the controversy surrounding the case. Several months after the trial, he died of a heart attack while serving time for his previous convictions, taking with him any knowledge he might have possessed about the Camp Scott murders. His death eliminated the possibility of future confessions or additional evidence that might have resolved the case definitively. The investigation continued for years after Hart's death, with new evidence periodically emerging that both supported and contradicted the original theory of his guilt. DNA testing conducted decades later provided results that were interpreted differently by various experts, with some claiming vindication of Hart's innocence while others maintained that the evidence still pointed to his involvement. The most unsettling aspect of the case remained the methodical planning that preceded the murders. Someone had spent months preparing for the attack, studying the camp's operations with a level of detail that suggested professional training or experience. This preparation included knowledge of the specific tent assignments, the counselors' routines, and the optimal timing for an undetected assault. The killer's ability to move through the camp without detection, even during a violent thunderstorm, demonstrated familiarity with the terrain that went beyond casual observation. The attack itself was carried out with efficiency that suggested previous experience with similar violence, raising questions about whether the Camp Scott murders were part of a larger pattern of crimes that had gone undetected. What do you think really happened in those dark woods of Camp Scott? Was Jean Leroy Hart the killer, or did someone else orchestrate this methodical nightmare? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more investigations into cases that defy explanation.